Hello and welcome back to Random Librarian here on YouTube. Today we are going to be talking about the Jean Harlow Bombshell by Mollie Cox Bryan. I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I wanted to escape the trap I fell into with my last rage read slash rant review and ate some food beforehand. So it is a little bit later than I would like to be filming, but I'm going to try my best to keep the lighting the way it's supposed to be in this video. If it changes midway through, I am sorry about that, but I'm doing what I can. This book is a classic star biography mystery, which is a mouthful. It's the first in a new series. This is the cover, this is the back with the lace and the leg, and it is described thusly. When it comes to writing Golden Age Hollywood biographies, the pen really is deadlier than the sword. Justine Turner is a world-famous biographer of Hollywood stars. She's also Charlotte Donovan's overbearing boss. So it comes as no surprise when Justine calls an emergency meeting related to her latest in-progress biography. It is a surprise, though, when Justine up and dies before their urgent discussion can begin. In the wake of such a tragedy, all Charlotte wants to do is finish the Jean Harlow biography that Justine started. Instead, she finds herself in grave danger, stalked both online and in person by a drop-dead Jean Harlow lookalike. Together with Police Sergeant Den Brophy, Charlotte uncovers shocking revelations. But will these revelations be enough to catch the killer? So that's what's going on here. I got this at the American Library Association. So I have the signature from the author. She made a little stamp of Jean Harlow's signature. She is related to Jean Harlow, somewhat distantly. Having met the author, it does make me kind of bummed to be doing this review, but you know, I gotta share my thoughts even if they're not what I wish they were when it came to this book, or if the book wasn't what I wish it was. I'm not trying to blame my thoughts for this. This book currently has a 3.73 star rating on Goodreads based on 71 ratings and 42 reviews. I'm not going to read any reviews that I picked out from Goodreads this time because I have a feeling this is going to get pretty long. I have my notes in front of me. If you see me glancing down, that's why. So yeah, I figured we'd just jump straight into the trigger warnings because the trigger warnings here is for white cis het women talking about experiences of people in the LGBTQ plus community and then me commenting on that. So there's some issues there. I'm worried that the way that she talks about trans women specifically could be really triggering, but I feel like the only way that that could have been fixed was if she had a trans editor, and that person could have been really triggered by the story in like the earlier drafts. And it sucks that like the weight of fixing things always falls on the community that is not understood by like the uneducated masses. But also, like, being an editor is a great job, and I think books in general and publishing in general would be best served by a more diverse group of people at the top. I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted about it. If you do have kind of specific ideas about this, if you're part of that community, please let me know in the comments down below. I feel like that could be a really interesting conversation, and I would love to learn more about individual specific stories. I know I just said that I'm really sorry that the work always falls to you, but your story is important and I would love to hear it. Book specifically. I'll get into more direct examples in a little bit, but please stop now. Just turn off, pause, get X out of this video if you think that this kind of discussion could cause gender dysphoric feelings. I don't want you to have to deal with that, especially when this is kind of like a joking rant review, mainly for the lols, and I don't want you to be harmed by this video if that is something that triggers you. Okay, trigger warning over. Okay, so overall, the writing and the plot in this book is pretty good. It makes for a really engaging read. There's a lot going on, which I'll overview first. But sadly, most of this review will be about what I didn't like in the book. You might have gauged that from the title, but here we go. The plot. So this is a murder mystery, a piece of biographical fiction, and a romance. That is 3 things going on just off the bat. But wow, is there a lot more crammed in there. So our main character, Charlotte, is the assistant to Justine, who is apparently a crazy famous biographer, who's friends with Hollywood elite like Meryl Streep, because girls, same. Charlotte has Lyme disease. It comes up a lot, and I'm still confused about what exactly that means. Because she kind of just blames it for anything that goes wrong. Like anything negative in her life is the problem of her disease. Like when she's hungry and tired after pulling an all-nighter to work on this biography, like, dang you, Lyme, like, no, it's the fact that you were up all night and didn't eat anything because you were in a writing fugue. Like, I'm so confused. Charlotte has a lot of medical bills for herself and for her alcoholic mother. She's paid under the table for some reason. Her dad is a cop and has been out of the picture for a long time. He is presumed dead for some reason, which I don't think is a thing that people normally do in, like, the modern era. Her grandma owns an antique shop and a gun. Her best friend is transgender. We'll get more into Kate in a bit. Charlotte has a pretty exclusive thing for cops. It's weird. We'll get into it. There is an excessive use of italics, both to put in emphasis, to, like, insert past nuggets of wisdom from the now deceased Justine, to show when something is an email, and also for Charlotte's thoughts. There is also this sort of like Cinderella storyline throughout the whole thing, because Justine leaves everything to Charlotte, who has all of these medical bills and other issues. But we don't find out about that until like way into the book. But she leaves Charlotte everything, including the apartment that has a view onto Central Park. And then there's also like this evil cousin who's trying to take it all away from her, so like that's also a thing. There's also a bunch of celebrity impersonators running around and disappearing into thin air, a scarred psychopath, and last but not least, hidden rooms. It's a lot. The cop thing. So this should be the quickest to wrap up, hopefully, so I'm gonna try and put it at the start here. On page 27, we have Charlotte basically calling herself cop sexual. Alrighty. Kate was unaware that one of the busiest cop bars was next to this place. Okay, maybe I did know too much about the local cops. Some women like kinky sex. Some prefer grand romantic gestures or dark, swarthy men. Me, I liked cops. Almost every man I'd ever dated was a cop. Of course, I dated a few others, but I always preferred the cops. Still, Kate made too much of it. So that's a thing that she said. It happened. Then on page 167, we get to learn about how that's all based in her daddy issues. So we have this opening quote from Justine, which is in italics, and she says, "The writer's life is a bitch, believe me, kid," from The Millionaire. Still, it was the only thing I'd ever wanted to do. Was I sadistic? Were we all? I never wished to be anything else, like a computer programmer or a teacher or, God forbid, a police officer. But here I was, investigating 2 murders. The daughter of a cop who left his family, the woman who craved cops in her bed. Sometimes I worried Kate was right. Sometimes I wondered if I have a problem with the men in blue. I mean, who wouldn't, after it all? But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction over that revelation. Not at all. The startling fact I'd found out about myself over the past few weeks was that I didn't need sex as much as I believed. Or maybe I'd just been distracted by murders in my work. So, why is she not having this sex that she believed that she needed, you may ask? Let me tell you. It is for this dumb, cop-based bet she has going on with Kate, which we find out about on page 29. So very early in this here book. We get this gem of a conversation. Kate goes, "Let's get your mind off of all of this." She paused. "Let's talk about your mom, or cloister gossip, or cops." Yeah, cops. What? Why? But I was already smiling. I've got $500 that says you can't stay away from cops for a month, she said with an ornery grin. Why? What do you mean, stay away? Don't sleep with any cops for 4 weeks. Bet you can't do it. Of course I can. What's this about? I half expected Kate to go off on me. Instead, she quieted. Because, my friend, you're searching for your father and you're never going to find him in the arms of a guy who just happens to be a cop. Are you a shrink now? I said. Why did she have to bring up my cop father, a man I barely remembered, a man who disappeared when I was 6 years old and who we now presumed dead? If his disappearance was influencing me at all, it would be just the opposite. I should hate cops. At times, I wish I did. So, that's like a big plot point that gets started on early, because everyone has bets like that with their friends. You're lying if you say you don't. So then we have this follow-up on page 187 where she said, I stopped writing and checked my Tinder account. A habit, a nervous habit. When I was jittery, my first inclination to soothe myself was sex, and I'd made a stupid bet with my best friend. A message from Zach. He was one of my favorites. If I had to, I couldn't choose between Zach and Juan. Thank goodness I didn't have to. Hey, sexy, where you been? Should I answer or leave him hanging? It wasn't as if we were having a relationship. I didn't know him any explanation, but still, just the thought of him and his gorgeous thighs sparked something deep inside of me. He was tempting. How would Kate find out if I slept with him once? So there's a lot going on there. It's not... People go on Tinder. People have strings of hookups that... I don't know. That's a thing, though. Like, that's not unrealistic. It's just that... I think this is one of the examples of this author not really doing her research for things other than Jean Harlow, aka her relatives, so like something that's directly related to her. I don't think she understands how Tinder works. It's not like someone gets a notification when you're active. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, don't you have to text them for them to be like, hey, where you been? Like, I don't... She also talks about, like, hailing Ubers. She says hailing cabs, too, so I think she thinks that they're the same, and, like, you just wave your hand at someone in a car, and, like, they'll pick you up. That is called hitchhiking. It is not the same as an Uber. Then she also has this thing where she makes a big deal out of contacting the French embassy in D.C., when I'm pretty sure the French consulate in New York, in, like, the area where she is and is writing about, could have given her the exact same information. So it was really weird and, like, pointless for me that she was like, oh, but, like, I have a contact in D.C. and, like, I'm just gonna keep calling them and they never get back to me. That is also very accurate, though. Bureaucracy. Also, there's only one female cop in this entire book. Because, cops aren't there to do their jobs in a mystery novel. In a book that is supposedly solving a murder. Cops are there to be stared at. Cops are there to be eye candy. Cops are there to be love interests. They're not there to solve shit. And then there's this whole next section about the LGBTQ plus community, specifically the trans experience, which just was not handled the way I wish it could have been handled. All right. On page 22, we get this information about the newly murdered Justine. This is one of those things where it is delivered in italics because it is, after her death, so we're getting, like, her ghostly advice from beyond the grave. I think. Justine would not write about Garbo. She claimed she could not objectively write about her. Or at least that's what the press would say. She was a huge lesbian icon, sort of like I am now. Then uproarious, stomach-jiggling laughter. So while Charlotte's relationship with Justine is pretty love-hate, we are, as an audience, presented with this intelligent, successful, badass lesbian icon only for her to be dead for most of the book. Like, and she has no loved ones left to mourn her except for this evil cousin from Florida and her assistant. Like, boo! If you're going to make this wonderful, like, complex character have an aspect of her character be that she is a lesbian? Can you make that part of her life rich and fulfilling and not just like a throwaway comment? Please? Things get much more complicated when it comes to Kate, her best friend. She is formally introduced to the reader like this on page 12. Kate was one of my few friends in the city. We'd grown up on Cloister Island together. Her parents assigned her the name Carl at birth, so in her newly transitioned female identity, she was over-the-top feminine, finally allowed to be herself. She stood before me in a floral 1970s yellow chiffon dress, with high platform shoes and shiny cobalt blue beads draped around her neck. And then her home life is shown to us this way on page 170. All right. She was probably remembering her own father and the beating she took when she told him she was getting the operation. She'd showed up at my door half dead. It sickened me to remember it even now, even after all these years. He was enraged so much about his son's gender that he beat the living shit out of him. So those are rough. And I don't think they're handled particularly well. Especially because Kate herself has these moments throughout the book where she could be the one to actually take ownership over her gender identity and over how the reader perceives it. And of course, Kate would do that without using her dead name and incorrect gender and incorrect pronouns. Like, Kate would do it in a way, you know, if Kate was the writer and, you know, we could actually place trust in that. But Kate could do it in a way that is already included in this book that I think would do more of the show not tell, and it wouldn't fall to Charlotte's thoughts. Like, luckily Kate doesn't hear any of this. She doesn't hear herself being referred to as Carl or the son or him. But like, it could just be done so much better, and it's already in here. That's what really drives me nuts. On page 195, okay, page 195, so Charlotte's in the hospital, and we have Kate, and she's telling Kate to go because she's busy, and Kate says, "That's a bunch of crap. You were with me for every one of my procedures, bestie, and I'm not going anywhere. Can we get her something more for the pain?" Subtle thing, but she's like, I've had procedures. If we did not know already that Kate was trans, that would be a nice way to be like, here's a hint, something's coming. And then on page 208, they're talking about dating, as you do, as, you know, the only thing that you talk about with your best friend. She goes, he knows about my Lyme, and after this attack, he's seen me at my worst. You know what men are like. People used to consider me one of them, you know. I laughed. I remember. I feel like that is just such a great way for Kate to be able to be like, hey, like, joke, remember how I was transgender? And have that actually be like the way the reader comes to know about Kate being trans, instead of it being like, Kate's my best friend. She's trans. Here's everything that was wrong about her life when we were kids. Like, why is that how she's introduced? That's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking both because, like, that is such a rough thing to go through, and also because I doubt she would want her best friend telling strangers reading their story about it. Maybe I'm taking this, like, too negatively, but that's how I'm reading it. Then there's also these other moments that feel like PSAs, which is very weird for someone who doesn't seem to know what she's talking about. So page 146 talks about murder rates and hate crimes. Which already, yikes. Like, true, important, but ugh. So, Charlotte and Den are talking, as they do, and they're talking about the murder of the Jean Harlow doppelganger. This impersonator is trans, and they've changed their name to be Jean Harlow. So that's how I'm going to refer to them, Jean Harlow II. And Den says, I want to point out this may have nothing to do with Justine's murder, he added. Of course it does. Why would you say that? Transgender people as a group are one of the highest in murder rates. Weight pressed on me. I had no idea. I immediately thought of Kate. It may be a hate crime. So, how could she not know that? But, you know, just in case the readers don't know, we're going to include it this way. On page 273, Charlotte says this weird sentence. Unfortunately, transgender people were often forced to live off the grid as much as they could. But I imagine if she was estranged from a violent father, she'd have taken great care not to leave a trace. Like, the second part makes sense if the first part is, like, not that. Because, like, the first part is a sentence and then it says, but I imagine. So, like, if the first sentence were, like, transgender people just want to live normal lives and, like, be the gender that they're supposed to be and like, carry on. But I imagined if she was estranged from a violent father, she'd have taken great care not to leave a trace. Like, that makes more sense. Saying transgender people were often forced to live off the grid as much as they could, what does that even mean? And does it seem true? Because I don't think it does. And also, why does she get to make these broad statements about trans people if she didn't know the previous, like, PSA thing? It's so weird to me. So those are already pretty yikes. I think the least favorite of these instances have to be the ones around Jean Harlow II. So like I said, Jean Harlow II is trans and a celebrity impersonator, and in this book, all celebrity impersonators are trans and have horrible home lives and pasts that they are trying to escape from. Because there's no other person who would want to do that, and there's no other story that could be told there. It's weird, especially because she makes a point of being like, I know what drag queens are, and like, but no drag queens would want to impersonate a famous person. Never mind the fact that in RuPaul's Drag Race, sometimes they have fun challenges where everyone has to do a different share, or like everyone has to pick a different famous person and do the snatch game and have comedy and know them up and down and left and right and just like forwards, backwards, and look like them all at the same time while being funny. No, like, drag queens aren't impersonators. Like, plus, you know, Jean Harlow II has been murdered. So, that's already just a bunch of stuff that I hate. But let's make it worse with these next couple of quotes. On page 297, Charlotte is talking to a psychiatrist because for some reason Justine worked with this psychiatrist in order to like write her books. Alright, I gotta fix the lighting now. I really gotta. Alright, so for some reason Justine worked with this psychiatrist to like make her books work. I don't know. They try to explain it, it doesn't make much sense to me. So, this conversation happens talking about Jean II's murder. Because she was murdered by her dad. So what you're describing is not a typical father killing a son. Many times, when that happens, they're what we call family annihilators. Something has gone wrong in the marriage, custody is an issue, it's a threat to his masculinity, she said as she sipped her Bloody Mary. So what about this guy? I think his masculinity was also threatened, but for different reasons. His son identified as a woman. For some, that would be difficult. I remembered Kate's dad beating her when he found out she would get the operation. In my practice, I see some of the dads trying to be supportive and come to terms with it. They reach out to me for help. That says something about their character. But these other men, very vengeful. And then Charlotte comes in with this fun take. Small penises? I said after a minute. Who knows? Let's not go there, doll. Okay, I was trying to just do like 2 parts for this because I find it so sad, but this next part is kind of a bit of a follow-up. So this is page 315. So very near the end of the book, they've caught the dad, and this is like the rundown of this. All Charlotte's thoughts. So I wish I'd gotten to know the Jean Harlow lookalike. Maybe Justine was planning to tell me about her that day at Layla's tea room. I would never know. In a way, it didn't even matter if the lookalike was blood related to the real Harlow. She believed she was. She became obsessed with the Tsar, so much so she had plastic surgery to make herself look more like her famous relative. Was she so haunted because of her father's obsession with Harlow? That held a kind of logic, but there was more to it. Luther, Lucky Stone, had taken his son's identification as a woman personally, as if it were an assault on his own manhood like Maud had suggested. He felt it was his failure as a father. The fact that his son had the ring once belonging to his mother only added insult to injury. Harlow's reputation also preoccupied Stone. He wanted to keep the story hushed. In some twisted way, he imagined he was protecting her honor by keeping the story secret. It was almost as if he were in love with her, in love with a woman long gone, in love with his mother's half-sister, way out of reach and more than a little creepy. Family. How did it get so twisted in some families? So that's weird. All of it. Very weird. Yeah, there's a lot of problematic use of pronouns there, and also blaming all of it on someone who's a psychopath and like didn't feel guilt over killing their own child because their child dared to do something that wasn't in their vision for that child. And psychopaths are not the leading cause of violence against trans people. Normal people, I think we can agree, are the leading cause, whether it is using a dead name, which is violence, misgendering, which is violence, or actual violence and murder, which is horrifying. So it feels like a really lazy and also harmful thing to just use and wrap up the story. So there is one more. This next one happens earlier on page 283. But I thought I would save it for last because, wow, I hate it so much. Also, it involves Den, so I figured, transition! Alright. Okay. 283, Den and Charlotte are talking, and they're talking about Jean Harlow II. And he says, I still think it's strange to change your name to a well-known movie star's name. Something wasn't right there. And then Charlotte says, I agree. It's like Sam was obsessed with Jean Harlow and wanted to become her. I made a mental note to check in with Maud about this, about the mental health question. Being trans is not a mental health issue. I think that's pretty much all I need to say. And all personally that I'm going to say, because it's not like my personal experience. There are so many amazing trans activists and even trans activists here on YouTube who can tell this story and talk about their own personal experiences so much more eloquently and with more relevant information than I ever could. So please go and watch their stories. Definitely don't take this book as like how trans people should be put into literature and how people should talk about being trans. Just know, like, if this entire section just has one truth, that truth is that being trans is not wrong and it is not a mental health issue. Honestly, with all of the heaviness of that previous section, it feels kind of weird to dive into complaining about the romance plot. But I'm gonna do it anyways, because it's fun. So we covered the cop thing and the bet thing. On page 188, we get the mess that is Charlotte's relationship history, and that is mixed up with her medical history because of course it is. Alright, 188. After John, I'd promised myself never again. We'd planned to marry. Then I'd gotten very sick and was hospitalized. And although he professed his love for me every day when he visited, at the same time he was screwing his best friend's wife. Yeah. It used to make me furious to think about it. It still did, but it was tempered by a few years and thoughts of gratitude. Thank God I hadn't married him. If John couldn't handle my illness, I had no business with him. It wasn't as if I was sick all the time, but I hadn't learned to manage it at that point, to pay attention to its tiny warning signs like exhaustion over nothing at all, confusion, and lack of clarity in my mind. Those were the days Justine said to walk away from my work. She understood many bosses would not have. Got it? Good. Because this book did not have enough subplots going on. Now, let's describe Den. Which, side note, is that supposed to be some kind of like artsy take on Dan? Or what? Seriously, huh? What is that name? Den? D-E-N? Like another word for living room? But as a name? Den Brophy. That's his last name. Okay, description, sorry. They first meet on page 7. Justine has been murdered at this point, and that is why they are meeting. She, is being questioned by the police because she was there. I think she fainted onto Justine's dead body at some point, so that was good. Anyways, she said, I lifted my face and studied Sergeant Den Brophy. His posture and attitude oozed cop, and his voice soothed me with its concerned tone like a strong but honeyed hot toddy on a cold winter night. She's in shock, and that's a sentence that she thought about this dude's voice, who's just trying to do his job. Then we get this fun monologue on page 63 as well. Alright. She walks into a cop bar that Den has asked her to meet at. She first makes sure that none of her previous cop friends are around. The coast was clear. Den sat straight on a bar stool, wearing jeans and an untucked dress shirt with a leather jacket. He hadn't spotted me yet, so I took a moment to enjoy him. Short, cropped, reddish-blonde hair, blue eyes, high cheekbones, and dimples, one in his chin. He set his drink down, moving with lion-like power, grace, and assurance. He sat back on the stool and crossed his arms, which made the jacket tighten. I could only guess those arms were ripped. Charlotte! He stood and shook my hand, briefly placing his arm on my shoulder. Electricity. Fire. I so wanted to climb into bed with him, wrap myself around him, forget about my day in his arms. Not yet. Not only did I have a bet to win, but I also had the meeting with Justine's lawyer in a couple of hours for the will reading. Because, someone's died. And that's how they met. Meet cute. So, firstly, I don't understand how he's sitting. Like, is he sitting against the bar and, like, looking at the door? In which case, how does he not see her, like, staring him down? And if he's sitting on the bar stool facing the bar, how can she see the dimple in his chin or the fact that his arms are crossed? This is a weird scene to me. I don't like it. Also, when he puts his arm on her shoulder to shake her hand, like, what is that? Also, like, do you, like, hug somebody to shake? I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't think it's cute, and I don't understand how it works. So then we also get this yikes moment 3 pages later on page 63. So that'll be fun. She goes, so they're talking, they've been talking this whole time. I bit the inside of my cheek. My, italicized. Not only was Den a looker, but he was astute as well, someone I could carry on a conversation with, which hadn't been my experience. Much. But it's okay, because we have an answering whoo boy on page 112. A look of respect came over Den's face, or newfound admiration. He liked the way I thought, which was a whole new experience for me. Most men didn't appreciate it when I used my mind. What? Like... Yikes. So basically, like, they meet, they're attracted, but he's all like, I can't date you while I'm working on a case where you're like involved, blah blah, professionalism, blah. And Charlotte has this pesky bet thing going on with Kate, you know, shenanigans. Then Charlotte gets attacked by the big bad, and she has to go to the island where she grew up to recuperate. And Den gets this like weird look on his face, and page 199 happens. He was quiet on the drive to the harbor. I figured he'd drop the breakup bombshell on me any minute, although it wasn't technically a breakup since we'd never even gone on a date. It's been my experience that most men don't want to be bothered with a woman who isn't healthy, let alone one with Lyme disease. Dan understood all that now. I figured he might have the class to wait for a few days, though. Again, we'd never dated. He owed me nothing. Nothing at all. So, yeah. Apparently, men only like women who are hot, don't use their brains, and never have to go to the hospital. What? Like, seriously, what? He doesn't take the ferry for an hour each way to go and visit her while she's home for, I think, less than a week. And she's saying that in doing that, but still, you know, talking to her on the phone and stuff, he's sending her mixed signals. So she's like, oh, well, like, whatever. Like, I'm not hung up on him. I don't like him. It's fine. We never dated. Like, whatever. And no, actually, that angst that we got was totally misplaced, because the reason he didn't go to see her is because he's aquaphobic. And it's a big deal that he's willing to share this part of himself with her. We have their first kiss on page 287 of a 320-page book. Yep. So, the author does kind of try to market herself as a writer of slow burn, but it's not even like it's slow burn. Like, they meet and are immediately attracted to each other, and then weird outside forces that make no sense are the reasons that they can't be together. But here's their first kiss, and it is not worth the wait. He says, let's go and eat. We'll get you out of this apartment and, you know, keep your strength up. You gotta eat things. And he's trying to, like, comfort her, and she says, his voice reached into the center of me as it had ever since the day I first met him, soothing, comforting, yet strong and in command. He opened his arms and I fell into them, awkward, as I was sitting on the chair and he was crouching. Again, how does that even work? But we found a way. We found our way to a standing position, and he didn't let go. I buried my face in his chest, and he stroked my shoulders, my hair. I pulled away just enough to glimpse his face, lifted my chin, pressed my lips to his. Currents of white-hot lust waved through me. He met my kiss with soft lips, with a demanding pressure. Wrong. So wrong. Which, like, imagine if I just stopped there. Like, that's it. But instead she goes, even though the bet was over, Dan had felt strongly about us not getting together while working on the case. But this molten heat sparked my insides. Raw, want, the sweet rush of the yield. When we came up for air, he lifted an eyebrow. Wow. I met his gaze. We haven't solved this case yet, he said. Yet he kissed me again. When we pulled away from one another, heat coursing through us, I gazed at his eyes. When we solve this case, you know where to find me. Yay. Such a strange way to write that. Also, she's like having an emotional freak out because someone wants to kill her, and his answer is hug, and then her answer to that is kiss, and then he's like, yeah, whoops, and then they say that they're not going to do it, and he's like, well, I'm going to take vacation time for when it's finally time for us to be together, and it's like, or maybe you could just start with like an evening off, or like a weekend, instead of like planning a week or like however long to have marathon sex with someone that you don't actually know that well and haven't known for longer than like, I don't even know how long this is supposed to have been, like a month? Like a month. Let's say a month. Well, other fun ways that Den is described. We have page 47. Okay, where she says, in italics, Den, so hot. A little over 3 weeks left until my bet with Kate is over, but who's counting? Then we have page 144, where they're talking on the phone, and she goes, my pulse quickened, his voice commanded me, and I had no choice. This was Den, Sergeant Den Brophy. Tendrils of fear, tinged with lust for him, circled through me as I readied to go to the morgue. You know, lust on your way to see all those dead bodies. Then we have 241. Den stood in a huff, chest out. A shock of excitement, fear, and attraction moved through me. Damn, he was all male. In italics. Also, very strange, the emphasis placed on, like, maleness. And that-ish, I don't like it. Let's see, 317. Kind of bouncing around a bit, but When I opened the door to Den, the sweet rush of temptation almost overcame me. He was dressed in nicely fitted jeans and a blue shirt which made his blue eyes pop. And what was in his eyes was a smoldering passion. At least that's what I gleaned. Yep. And then we have 215, which is a fun segue into how this man affects Charlotte, which sounds painful and medically dangerous. So, she goes, I pictured Den with his blue eyes and sideways grin. What the hell is a sideways grin? Like, does it go this way? Because that sounds problematic and terrifying, and like it should be in a horror film. His wide shoulders and solid arms. I was feeling too down to tingle, but not too down for my heart to skip a few beats. I really want to throw this again, but I don't want to have to get up to get it. Too down to tingle is my least favorite sentence in the English language. Yeah, let's go to 280. When I opened the door to Den, dressed in his uniform, all angles and solid maleness, a fluttering in my belly awakened. So, you know, not as dangerous as what's to come, but, you know, sounds like she's gonna puke on him. Page 116. Den's voice was full of confidence and authority. And who was I to argue, as if I could, with the molten heat forming in my lower regions? Uh-huh. And then we have 105. When I opened the door to Den, which seems to happen a lot, he nearly took my breath away. As he stood there in his uniform, sex emanated from him. Tendrils of excitement raced through my lower regions. Calm down, woman, in italics. I hate that so much. Lower regions and the way that she uses. I don't like it. I don't like it. Then we have page 61. Where he like answers the phone and he goes, yes, what can I do for it? He breathed into the phone. Like, what does that sound like? Yes. What can I do for you? What? He wasn't flirting, was he? He was probably dreaming on my part. But something about the tone in his voice made my insides pop. Pop? Please go to the hospital. Your insides should not be popping unless you've eaten Pop Rocks. And even then, it should just be inside of your mouth. If they're popping in your esophagus or in your stomach, I think that could actually cause some damage. Also, forgot about this. She is not like other girls, in case you hadn't picked up on this in the rest of the storyline. I forgot to make a warning for that, but here it is on page 209, in the midst of when she thinks Den doesn't like her anymore, but he's just afraid of water. She goes, it had been 2 days on the island and no call from Den. Was he avoiding me or too busy to call? I caught myself. I told myself I'd never be one of those women, the ones who wait for the phone calls. This was why I took solace in controlling my relationships through dating apps, why I hadn't gotten involved with anyone for a few years, yet somehow Den had wormed his way beneath my well-tended shell. I was glad it would stop now. I had to focus my attention elsewhere. So not only is that, very annoying, she also is, telling us multiple times that, she's glad that they're not actually going to hook up or date because, she's got other shit to do. But then they end up together. Because why wouldn't they? So I mentioned at the start that I have a lot of thoughts about this book right here. The storyline is good. Like I said, the writing is good. I hate the way that the LGBTQ plus community is portrayed, especially all of the different trans characters. While I think it is great that there are multiple trans characters in this book, sadly a lot of them could just be interchangeable. They all have tragic pasts, dads who did not accept them and who misgender them still and are likely to beat them up whenever they go home. And basically they're all the same person. They're all beautiful. They all have great fake boobs. 3 out of the 4 of them are all celebrity impersonators. Like I said, every celebrity impersonator that we meet in this book is trans and has a shitty upbringing. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Trans people are people. As such, they have different life experiences. The thing is, I really wanted to like this book. The fact that, we get trans representation within the first 12 pages is, I think, a pretty big deal. But because it was written from this perspective of this woman being well, I'm not like other girls, and writing this wish fulfillment story about cops and biographies that actually mean something, and changing the way things work to make her relative kind of equivalent to Marilyn Monroe. I had to do a little bit of research to even know who Jean Harlow was. Does that name mean something to other people? Apparently Catherine Zeta-Jones dressed up as Jean Harlow for Halloween this year, but that is the most recent reference I could find to her on Google. The rest are Wikipedia pages or fan pages and movie references, her IMDb page. There aren't fancy biographies popping up popular history kind of style. So I don't know if this book just kind of exists in an alternate universe, New York, where like this person is very well known and it would cause this much of a hullabaloo if like stuff came out about them. And maybe in that universe, all impersonators are trans. But I don't think so. I feel like it was trying to be in the here and now, and maybe trying to make Jean Harlow more of this historical starlet that we need to know about. There's even a mention in the book where like they're going to do the press for it, and it said, "We planned the press conference down to the most minute details. We publicized it, announcing that the public would be allowed as room permitted, figuring most people couldn't care less about Jean Harlow or her ring." So like even in this alternate universe, that falls apart because they're not expecting people to give two shits about it. And yeah, like I wish there were fewer things that made me so mad in this book. More of the representation of the trans women, especially because one of them is supposed to be one of the main characters in this book, and her agency is very much taken away from her, and I don't like that. And obviously I hate the romance. Like that's kind of a given from the start. I do want to find a romance book that I actually enjoy, so if anyone has recommendations, please leave them in the comments. If I stumbled along the way, I am also just a white cishet woman, so if I am messing up, please let me know so that I can fix it. I want to handle this with respect and as an ally. So if I'm doing anything wrong, if I need to be schooled, please school me in the comments, because I don't want to do this wrong. I just read this and there were repeated instances that made me angry on behalf of the trans community. I don't want to recommend this book as a result of the things that I found so wrong with it. I just saw it on the new shelf in my public library, so I know this book is out there, I know it's circulating, and I am just bummed that it wasn't handled better, because I think the idea is there, and obviously we need more diversity both in the publishing world, as I said at the beginning, and in the actual characters included in books. But if those characters are not handled correctly, that can be just as problematic and just as damaging as if those characters had been cishet women. At least from my point of view. Again, I could be wrong. So these are all of my thoughts about this book. I know I included a lot of quotations in this one, but honestly, I didn't want to present these things without the context in which they were presented to me as the reader. I had even more tabs on this book before I sat down to kind of figure out what I wanted to say. So even though the writing is good and even though the story is engaging and I read it pretty quickly, this is not a book that I would recommend. I just had too many things that I personally found wrong with it. I am very sorry, Mollie Cox Bryan. You were lovely when I got to meet you. Thank you for signing my book. I am going to go and put it into a free library now. If someone wants to read it, they will. But if you see this review first, I advise against it. Well, this was a pretty negative review. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If it made you mad, I'm really sorry, but I wanted to share that I was mad with other people. So here we are. Let me know your thoughts down below, and if you feel like it, hit the subscribe button to come back. I'm trying to do videos at least once a week. I am pretty new here on both BookTube and Bookstagram. I will see you guys soon if that is what you want. So, until then, happy reading.